In March 1968, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine vanished in the Pacific Ocean. 98 men, no distress call, no wreckage, no explanation. The Soviet Navy searched for months, dozens of ships, aircraft, other submarines. They found nothing. Moscow declared the crew dead and closed the file. What the Soviets didn't know was that the Americans had already found it. U.S. underwater listening networks had detected the submarine's death explosions, then the sound of a hull collapsing under crushing pressure. The CIA pinpointed the wreck 3 miles down and began planning the most audacious intelligence operation of the Cold War. They built a 600-foot ship disguised as a deep-sea mining vessel. They told the world they were harvesting minerals from the ocean floor. They were actually stealing a Soviet nuclear submarine from under Moscow's nose. When the massive mechanical claw finally brought part of the submarine to the surface in 1974, the crew was still inside, preserved by 6 years in freezing darkness. But the evidence of their final moments revealed something that both superpowers would spend decades trying to hide. K-129 was a Project 629A submarine designated Gulf II class by NATO intelligence. Built in the late 1950s and modified throughout the early 1960s, it represented a critical component of Soviet nuclear deterrence. The submarine was not designed for speed or stealth by modern standards. It was designed for one purpose: to carry nuclear missiles within striking distance of American targets and wait for orders that everyone hoped would never come. The boat carried 3 R-21 ballistic missiles and tubes mounted in the sail. Each missile could deliver a nuclear warhead to targets over 800 miles away: Hawaii, the American West Coast, military installations across the Pacific. From its patrol zones, K-129 held millions of lives in its launch tubes. The submarine was based at Ryabchi Naval Base on the Kamchatka Peninsula, a remote and heavily fortified installation that served as home to the Soviet Pacific Fleet ballistic missile submarines. The base existed for secrecy. The submarines that departed from its piers carried the apocalypse in their hulls, and their movements were among the most closely guarded secrets in the Soviet military. Captain First Rank Vladimir Kubzar commanded K-129. At age 45, he was an experienced submariner who had spent his career in the Soviet Navy's undersea forces. His crew numbered 98 men, a mix of officers, enlisted sailors, and technical specialists. Some were veterans of multiple patrols. Others were younger, still learning the peculiar rhythms of submarine life. All of them understood what they carried and what their mission meant. In February 1968, K-129 departed Ryabchi for what was classified as a routine combat patrol. Routine was a relative term. In the context of Cold War submarine operations, routine meant sailing into the Pacific, taking a position within missile range of American targets, and waiting. The submarine would maintain radio silence for weeks at a time, surfacing periodically at predetermined intervals to check for communications from Fleet Command. Unless orders came to launch, the crew would eventually turn for home and repeat the cycle months later. The timing was significant. In early 1968, Cold War tensions had reached a dangerous peak. The Vietnam War was escalating. The Tet Offensive had just shocked American military confidence. Soviet and American relations were deteriorating across multiple fronts. Both superpowers maintained fleets of nuclear submarines as insurance against the unthinkable, weapons so devastating that their purpose was to never be used. K-129 slipped beneath the gray Pacific swells and headed southeast toward its patrol zone. The crew settled into the monotonous routines of submarine life: watch rotations, equipment maintenance, sleep, and shifts. The same corridors, the same faces, the same recycled air for weeks on end. The submarine was scheduled to surface and transmit a status report on March 8, 1968. Fleet Command waited at the appointed time, listening for the coded signal that would confirm K-129 was operational and on station. The transmission never came. The silence that followed would last for 6 years. When it finally broke, Americans, not Soviets, discovered what had happened to K-129. When K-129 missed its scheduled radio contact on March 8th, Soviet Pacific Fleet Command did not immediately panic. Submarines operated under strict communication protocols, but the ocean was unpredictable. Equipment malfunctions occurred. Atmospheric conditions could interfere with transmissions. A missed contact was concerning, but not unprecedented. March 9th passed with no signal, then March 10th, then March 11th. By the end of the second week, concern had escalated to alarm. The Soviet Navy launched one of the largest submarine search operations in its history. Dozens of surface vessels deployed across the North Pacific. Long-range aircraft flew search patterns over thousands of square miles of open ocean. Other submarines were diverted from their missions to assist. They found nothing. The search continued for weeks. Ships crisscrossed the patrol zones where K-129 should have been operating. Lookouts scanned for debris, oil slicks, emergency buoys, any evidence that a submarine had met disaster. The Pacific offered nothing. No wreckage floating on the surface, no bodies, no answers. The Soviet Navy was searching in the wrong place. K-129 had deviated from its assigned patrol route for reasons that have never been fully explained. The submarine was hundreds of miles from where Fleet Command expected it to be when it died. Every ship, every aircraft, every hour spent searching was wasted on empty ocean. By May, Soviet leadership faced reality. K-129 was gone. 98 men were dead, and Moscow had no idea where or why. The political implications were staggering. A nuclear-armed submarine had vanished without explanation. Admitting this publicly would invite questions the Soviet government could not answer. Questions about the reliability of their submarine fleet. Questions about the security of their nuclear weapons. Questions about what exactly had happened in the depths of the Pacific. The families received carefully worded notifications. Their husbands, sons, and fathers had died in service to the Soviet Union. A training accident was implied. Details were classified. No bodies would be returned. No funeral services could reveal what the men had actually been doing when they died. The official Soviet position became a wall of silence. K-129 was lost during routine exercises. Cause unknown, location unknown. The matter was closed. What Moscow did not know, could not know, was that the Americans had been listening the entire time. The sound surveillance system, known as SOSUS, was a network of underwater hydrophones installed across the Pacific Ocean floor designed to detect and track Soviet submarine movements. The system recorded every significant acoustic event in its range. Whale songs, ship propellers, underwater earthquakes, and on March 8, 1968, something else. American analysts detected a sequence of sounds originating from the North Pacific. First, explosions, multiple detonations in rapid succession. Then, seconds later, the unmistakable acoustic signature of a submarine imploding under extreme pressure. The hydrophone network allowed triangulation. American intelligence calculated the approximate location of the acoustic event. They knew where K-129 had died. They knew before the Soviets had even begun searching. They said nothing. While Soviet ships hunted across the empty ocean, American planners studied the coordinates and calculated the possibilities. A Soviet ballistic missile submarine lay on the Pacific floor. Nuclear weapons, encryption equipment, code books, missile technology, intelligence worth more than money could measure. The submarine rested 16,500 feet down, 3 miles beneath the surface. No technology existed to recover anything from that depth. The CIA decided to create it. The SOSUS hydrophone network had provided approximate coordinates. Approximate was not good enough for what the CIA was planning. To recover a submarine from 3 miles down, they needed to know exactly where it rested, exactly what condition it was in, and exactly what challenges the operation would face. They needed eyes on the target. USS Halibut was officially a guided missile submarine converted for deep ocean research. Unofficially, it was one of the most capable intelligence-gathering vessels ever built. The submarine had been extensively modified to carry sophisticated equipment that most of the Navy did not know existed. Cameras, sensors, remotely operated systems designed for operations the government would never acknowledge. The most important piece of equipment was called FISH, a towed camera sled that could be lowered to extreme depths while Halibut cruised slowly above. FISH carried powerful lights and high-resolution cameras capable of photographing the seafloor in detail that would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. In the summer of 1968, Halibut deployed to the North Pacific under complete operational secrecy. The crew knew they were searching for something, but only a handful of officers understood what. Cover stories explained the mission as oceanographic research. The truth was buried in classification levels that most sailors had never heard of. The search area was vast. Even with SOSUS triangulation, the target zone covered hundreds of square miles of ocean floor. Halibut cruised methodically, lowering FISH repeatedly, photographing mile after mile of empty seafloor, mud, rocks, the occasional deep-sea creature startled by lights it had never evolved to expect. Week after week, the cameras captured nothing but barren Pacific bottom. The crew grew frustrated. The mission was tedious beyond description. Lower the sled, cruise for hours, retrieve the sled, develop the film, study the images, find nothing, repeat. The psychological strain of searching for something they could not discuss in waters that seemed to stretch forever wore on everyone aboard. Then the cameras found it. K-129 resting on the seafloor at a depth of 16,500 feet. The submarine was sitting upright, slightly tilted, largely intact. Not a scattered debris field, not a crushed shell, a recognizable submarine preserved by the cold and pressure of the deep Pacific. The photographs revealed damage consistent with violent destruction. The sail showed evidence of an explosion. Hull breaches were visible along the forward section, but the overall structure remained. The missile tubes were identifiable. The hatches appeared intact. Whatever had killed K-129 had not completely destroyed it. The images traveled through classified channels to CIA headquarters in Langley. Analysts studied every frame. Engineers assessed structural integrity. Intelligence officers cataloged what the submarine might contain. Nuclear warheads, missile guidance systems, encryption machines, code books that could unlock Soviet naval communications. For years, the prize sitting on the Pacific floor was worth almost any cost to retrieve. The location was confirmed. The target was assessed. The decision moved up the chain of command to the highest levels of American government. They would recover K-129. The only question was how to steal a submarine from 3 miles down without the Soviets ever knowing. The challenge facing the CIA had no precedent in engineering history. No one had ever attempted to lift a large object from 16,500 feet of water. 3 miles down was an entirely different problem. The pressure at that depth exceeded 7,000 pounds per square inch. The temperature hovered near freezing. Perpetual darkness meant every operation would rely entirely on cameras and remote systems. The submarine itself weighed approximately 2,000 tons. Standard salvage was impossible. The CIA needed to invent something new. Engineers proposed a concept that sounded like science fiction. Build a massive ship with a hollow center called a moon pool. Lower a giant mechanical claw on a pipe string 3 miles long. Grab the submarine, lift it into the ship's belly, close the doors, sail away with a Soviet nuclear submarine hidden inside the hull. The cost estimate approached $500 million. In 1970, this was an astronomical sum for a single intelligence operation. The technical risks were enormous. The pipe string alone would weigh thousands of tons. The claw had to grip a fragile, deteriorating submarine without crushing it or breaking it apart. Any failure at depth would be catastrophic and likely unrecoverable. CIA Director Richard Helms reviewed the proposal and approved it. The potential intelligence value justified almost any expense. The project received the codename Azorian. Construction planning began immediately. But before a single weld could be made, the operation faced a fundamental problem. A ship this large could not be hidden. It would be visible in ports. It would be tracked by Soviet satellites. Moscow would eventually wonder what such a vessel was doing in the middle of the Pacific. The CIA needed a cover story that could withstand scrutiny from the most suspicious intelligence service on Earth. They found an unlikely partner in Howard Hughes. The eccentric billionaire had built his fortune on aerospace, defense contracts, and a willingness to pursue ventures others considered insane. His reputation for secrecy and unconventional projects made him perfect for the purposes of the CIA. Hughes agreed to lend his name and corporate infrastructure to a deception designed to fool the Soviet Union. The cover story was elegant in its simplicity. Hughes was entering the deep-sea mining business to Pacific, specifically harvesting manganese nodules from the Pacific seafloor. These potato-sized mineral deposits were real, and they contained valuable metals. Several legitimate companies were genuinely exploring extraction techniques. Hughes announced a major mining venture, which attracted media attention, but it raised no intelligence alarms. The ship was constructed at a Pennsylvania shipyard and named Hughes Glomar Explorer. At 619 feet long, it was one of the largest vessels ever built for a specialized purpose. The exterior looked like what it claimed to be, a deep-sea mining ship equipped with a massive derrick and heavy lift capabilities. The interior concealed the truth. The moon pool, the pipe string storage, the compartments designed to receive and process a Soviet submarine. The capture vehicle was built separately and nicknamed Clementine. It was a giant mechanical claw with hydraulic arms designed to reach around the hull of K-129 and grip it securely for the 3-mile lift. The engineering tolerances were impossibly tight. Too much pressure would crush the deteriorating submarine. Too little would allow it to slip free during ascent. Construction took 3 years. The technical problems were solved one by one through engineering brilliance, massive funding, and occasional luck. By 1974, Glomar Explorer was ready. The ship sailed to the Pacific. Soviet intelligence tracked its movements, but accepted the manganese mining explanation. Observation vessels monitored from a distance without suspecting what lay in the moon pool beneath the deck. Above the grave of K-129, the most expensive intelligence operation in history prepared to reach into the abyss and steal the dead from the deep. August 1974. The Glomar Explorer positioned itself above the coordinates where K-129 had rested undisturbed for 6 years. The Pacific surface was calm. The weather cooperated. Soviet observation vessels monitored from a distance, but showed no signs of unusual interest. The cover story was holding. Below the ship, 16,500 feet of black water separated the crew from their target. The moon pool doors opened. Clementine began its descent, lowered on a pipe string that would eventually stretch 3 miles. The journey to the bottom took hours. Operators monitored cameras and sensors as the capture vehicle sank through progressively darker water. Light from the surface faded within the first few hundred feet. Below that, only the vehicle's own lights illuminated anything at all. At 16,500 feet, the cameras showed the seafloor emerging from darkness, mud, silt, and then gradually resolving into focus the unmistakable shape of a submarine. K-129 looked much as the halibut photographs had shown 6 years earlier, upright, intact, waiting. The cold and pressure of the deep Pacific had preserved it far better than any surface wreck could have survived. The damage from whatever catastrophe had killed the boat was visible, but the structure remained coherent. Clementine maneuvered into position above the submarine. The operation entered its most critical phase. The mechanical arms extended, reaching around the hull. Operators on the surface worked through cameras and remote controls, positioning each grabber with painstaking precision. One mistake could crush the fragile hull or send the claw scraping uselessly across the seafloor. Contact. The arms gripped K-129. Hydraulic systems engaged, tightening the hold. Sensors confirmed the capture vehicle had secured the submarine. The lift began. Inch by inch, the pipe string drew its prize upward. The weight was staggering. 2,000 tons of submarine, plus the capture vehicle, plus 3 miles of pipe. The stresses on every component pushed engineering limits that had never been tested outside of calculations. Hours passed. The submarine rose through the water column, 1 mile, 2 miles. The cameras showed K-129 secured in Clementine's grip, rising toward a surface it had left 6 years before with 98 men aboard. Then disaster struck. Approximately 2/3 of the way to the surface, Clementine failed. Some accounts blame metal fatigue, others point to the deteriorated condition of the submarine's hull. The precise cause remains classified. What matters is what happened next. The aft section of K-129 broke away. Operators watched helplessly on their monitors as the majority of the submarine fell. The missile compartment contained the 3 nuclear ballistic missiles. The section housed the code room and encryption equipment, the compartments where most of the crew had been stationed when the submarine died. All of it tumbled back into the darkness, 3 miles down, scattering across the seafloor, far from the original resting place. What remained in Clementine's grip was the forward section, the bow, the torpedo room, part of the sail, roughly 1/3 of the submarine. The lift continued. There was no way to recover what had fallen. The operation had partially failed, but partial success still meant bringing up a section of a Soviet nuclear submarine. The moon pool doors opened. The forward section of K-129 rose into Glomar Explorer's hull. Seawater drained away. For the first time in history, Americans looked inside a Soviet ballistic missile submarine. The torpedo room contained nuclear torpedoes still in their tubes. Weapons specialists began immediate assessment. The technology was valuable, though not the primary prize the operation had sought. But the ship had also brought into the light something else, something the mission planners had considered only as an afterthought in their calculations of intelligence value. The crew. They were still inside, and 6 years in the freezing Pacific had preserved them in ways that the recovery team had not fully anticipated. The recovery team had prepared for intelligence material, weapons, documents, encryption equipment. The human element had been acknowledged in planning documents, but treated as secondary to the operational objectives. What they found in the forward section of K-129 forced a reckoning with the reality that this submarine was not merely a source of intelligence, it was a tomb. 6 bodies were recovered from the forward compartments. The cold of the deep Pacific had preserved them in ways that surface conditions never could. At 16,500 feet, the water temperature hovers just above freezing year-round. Bacterial activity slows to almost nothing. The normal processes of decomposition operate on timescales measured in decades rather than months. The men of K-129 had been waiting in the darkness largely intact for 6 years. They were found at their stations, the torpedo room crew near their weapons, technical specialists near their equipment, men who were working when death came, frozen in the positions where catastrophe had caught them. Whatever killed K-129 had given no warning. There had been no time to react, no time to move toward escape routes that didn't exist at these depths anyway. The condition of the remains and the compartments told a story that forensic specialists pieced together over weeks of examination. The damage patterns indicated an internal explosion. It was not depth charges from an enemy destroyer, and it was not a torpedo from an American submarine. Something had detonated inside K-129 itself. The blast had originated within the hull, rupturing compartments and flooding the boat with seawater under enormous pressure. Several theories emerged to explain the catastrophe. One possibility was hydrogen gas buildup from the batteries. Soviet submarines of this era used lead-acid batteries that produced hydrogen during charging. Inadequate ventilation could allow the gas to accumulate until a spark ignited it. Battery explosions had killed submarines before. Others suggested a missile malfunction. The R-21 ballistic missiles carried volatile liquid propellants. A fuel leak, an oxidizer breach, or a failure in the tube sealing systems could trigger an explosion powerful enough to destroy the boat. A third theory pointed to the torpedoes. Conventional explosive components in the warheads could detonate under certain malfunction conditions. A torpedo accident would explain the concentration of damage in the forward sections. But a darker theory circulated within intelligence circles, spoken quietly and never officially endorsed. K-129 deviated from its assigned patrol route. The submarine was found hundreds of miles from where Soviet Fleet Command expected it to be. No one has ever explained why. Some analysts believe the submarine had been attempting an unauthorized missile launch, a rogue commander, a crew divided, a struggle in the control room that ended when someone ensured the missiles would never fire. The theory remains unproven. The evidence that could confirm or deny it fell back to the seafloor with the aft section. It rests there still, 3 miles down, in a debris field that no nation has explored. The CIA faced an unexpected decision. 6 Soviet sailors had been recovered. Enemies in life, they were now simply dead men far from home. The question of what to do with them had no precedent in intelligence operations. Someone made a choice that transcended Cold War hostility. A burial at sea was conducted with full honor. Forward sections. But a darker theory circulated within intelligence circles, spoken quietly and never officially endorsed. K-129 deviated from its assigned patrol route. The submarine was found hundreds of miles from where Soviet Fleet Command expected it to be. No one has ever explained why. Some analysts believe the submarine had been attempting an unauthorized missile launch, a rogue commander, a crew divided, a struggle in the control room that ended when someone ensured the missiles would never fire. The theory remains unproven. The evidence that could confirm or deny it fell back to the seafloor with the aft section. It rests there still, 3 miles down, in a debris field that no nation has explored. The CIA faced an unexpected decision. 6 Soviet sailors had been recovered. Enemies in life, they were now simply dead men far from home. The question of what to do with them had no precedent in intelligence operations. Someone made a choice that transcended Cold War hostility. A burial at sea was conducted with full honor.